Good morning, everybody. Good morning, Zoom. Good morning, Facebook. Good morning, our community. Good morning, Deanna.
Good morning.
Good morning, Amy.
Good morning.
Good morning, Christian.
Good morning.
Good morning, Tim.
Good morning.
Good morning, Naomi. Did I miss anybody? I think we got everybody so far. Good morning, Zoom. Good morning, Barbara. All right. It is day 53. It might be your day one. That's okay too. We've got the big hiring event today. We've got a very full office. Got a little Serpa team meeting at 10 o'clock, followed by the Serpa team hiring event at 11 o'clock. And this is going to be unlike anything that we've ever done before. We're not going to reinvent the wheel here, but what we're going to do is everyone that comes in, as soon as they become licensed, they get ownership in this. And I just found out this morning, Christian Tikas, that we qualify for a standard team at EXP with our next two transactions that we close, which means that everyone on the team will be able to pay a half cap.
Oh, that's awesome.
Which means instead of paying $16,000, everyone on the team will only have to pay $8,000 towards the cap. They still get the benefits of stock and recruiting. The only thing that you can't get is the Icon program, which of course that would take a lot of real estate to sell in order to get to that Icon program by yourself anywhere, or let alone on a team. So anyway, I'm very excited about today. I'm very grateful to be in the office. We're talking about leasing versus buying today. And we're actually going to expand on that a little bit to talk about the difference between renting versus owning, being an employee versus owning your business. There's a lot of different things that you could get into. And of course, we preach ownership constantly as real estate agents, and yet very few of us own the space that we are working out of. Very few of us own the business that we are working on as part of a cooperative agreement, as part of an incentivized ownership platform, or anything otherwise. Very few of us have stock in the companies that we're working for. And so what does ownership look like? And I tell people, ownership isn't cheap. Ownership, of course, is expensive at times. It's an investment. But the idea is to get to a point to where your ownership is paying you. You are earning dividends, right? So if you are looking at something like leasing a house versus buying a house, what's the cost of renting? What's the cost of buying? And then when you get to a point to where you have enough wealth in real estate, you can actually put that money to work for you. I tell people all the time, you have to spend one of three things to get started in any business. One of two things, money or time. And you have to spend both in order to stay relevant and continue to grow. It is not that sort of business that you should start with your eye on the exit, but having an eye on your future through financial planning, through all of these different opportunities that are made available to you. If you don't have a plan, that's no plan. Your plan is no plan. So have your eye on the future. But how many retirement parties have you thrown in real estate? How many real estate retirement parties have you attended? There are not a lot of them. And the truth is it's often a complicated way out the door. And people find themselves working in this industry well into their twilight years. So what does it look like to own real estate? What does it look like to own a business? What does it look like to put that business to work for you, the people around you, through better systems and procedures? Okay. Now, we're going to touch briefly on working with renters because that's a question that I get very frequently. What do I do if I get a renter? Who do I send them with? David, do you work with renters? Who do we have? I'm going to touch on that very briefly because the truth is there's not a lot of incentive these days to work with renters, even out of a passionate, good-hearted, perspective. You kind of need to put them to work for themselves because a lot of times people see, agents as a middleman that they don't necessarily want to deal with, especially when it comes to a property management contract. And so there's a lot of predatory type of programs out there. Well, what you'll see somebody, because it's a flooded rental market right now. There's tons and tons of people who want to rent, who either can't afford to buy, who have cash in excess, et cetera, and so forth, because they're relocating out here. They're willing to pay months in advance. And so what happens is a lot of these property management companies, they'll take the application fee from 10, 15 people, 20 people, only with the intent of accepting one. Now, if the fee is $35 and they take that fee from 20 different people, you could see how that would add up quickly. I believe that that's $700 that they're making in just screening applicants for 20 applicants for one rental. And so there are a lot of predatory practices that make it very difficult for people to participate in the market as a renter, which is all the more incentive to fix your credit, find a way to buy. Find a way to buy that you believe in. There's a lot of people that are like, oh, the market's going to crash and whatnot. It's like, listen, if you pay attention to the market, you're any 5 years, you're going to see that there's sort of a consistent growth where it continues to go up. And so a lot of that rebound, as long as people were able to hold on to that real estate, it came back. Now what happens is people get caught in this debt wheel of refinancing, or having their wealth reset through financial devastation, a lot of times through no fault of their own. The economy, COVID-19, the stock market crash, their job got shipped overseas, et cetera, and so forth. So I tell people all the time, listen, if you don't have a whole lot of reliability, do you want to be in a tenant situation or do you want to be in a homeowner situation, right? Or maybe you've got some equity, maybe you've got some room to play with. And the truth is as many tenant rights as there are in California, when it comes to living in someone else's house, if things turn south, it puts you in a very complicated situation versus having the ability to buy. And they're only printing so much more land. They only made so much earth. It will pay you to own a piece of it. And then, of course, real estate creates generational wealth. And so if you're not preaching to people to buy right now, you're preaching to them to deny themselves and their children and their children's children generational wealth that accumulates through no better way than through real estate. Unfortunately, we're in a situation where due to scarcity in a lot of different ways, it causes prices to go up. Okay, energy scarcity, rolling blackouts. The government kind of has a monopoly on energy. And so what happens is energy prices go up naturally. So we've made it so difficult to build in California because of all these different restrictions and whatnot. Hi, Naomi. that it's a scarcity thing. So more and more people are being pushed into rental situations and then being pushed further out the door into homeless situations. We've seen 60,000, I believe is the number, new homeless people in the city of Los Angeles since the start of COVID-19. What's happening is the people on the brink of homelessness, a lot of times, they were already living in the margins. And so the best way to set yourself up is to not live within the margins if possible. And you can't do that by being an employee a lot of the times.
We're at 600,000 homeless.
600,000 homeless. Nationwide. So 600,000 homeless. And who is looking out for them? What is the incentive there, right? And so Christian and I are constantly talking about, instead of practicing real estate on the golf courses and in the wineries, practicing it in the streets, on Main Street, in the high schools, teaching people about home ownership. And we've been talking to a lot of young people. We actually are at a point right now in our office where we regularly have high school students coming in here to learn about real estate. The other day, Christian was having an opportunity to not only mentor a young lady about real estate, but she came in and she was mentoring us about technology. That's the thing. Anyone that you think that can come into your life that you can't learn something from, that's on you, right? And so the return is, listen, these are all of these things that are going on. These are all of the different ways in which you can accumulate wealth. Let's set you up for success. Because the people that don't believe in the next generation, the alarmist, right? The people that don't believe that our best days are ahead of us aren't equipping the next generation. They're also not taking the time to see the next generation. So if you are going to take the time to see it, you're going to take the time to educate, you also better be drinking the Kool-Aid. And so for me, ownership is important. I believe in ownership. I also believe that we need to create more paths to ownership. And one of those ways is to create, this is the other path, Naomi. if you wanted to, or you just continue to just hang out in the shot, homie. That's the reason why I set this up. I want people to see that there are people in here. The path to ownership is complicated. It can be expensive at times, but isn't the path to not owning something expensive? Isn't the path to paying off somebody else's mortgage expensive, right? What are your rights? What are your opportunities? How do you educate yourself and the people around you? And then in turn, get educated, right? How much do you learn just by being involved in humanity? So, and then the last thing that we're going to talk about is becoming a tenant. What does it cost to become a tenant? A lot of times people talk about the cost of homeownership, but they don't talk about the cost of being a tenant, the cost of being a renter, right? It's not cheap to pay off somebody else's house. It's not cheap to make it so that somebody else's family is set up indefinitely for wealth when your family is struggling to make ends meet. Okay, that is expensive ultimately, not only for you, but for the people that are following you, your children, et cetera, and so forth. So if you're creating a path to wealth, if you're creating a path to ownership, and then if you're creating a path to ownership, you see the intelligence, the enlightenment of sharing that wealth and that intelligence with other people, because that then spreads a fire, right? So one of the ways in which we can create more home opportunities is a way that constantly gets shut down by this area, which is high density housing. We're calling it high density housing. If we cannot create a barrier of entry for people to own in areas where there are already good school districts, there are already access to healthy food and everything like that, then we can't create more opportunities for the floor level of home ownership. And so I love a lot of things that we're doing here. You can't walk through this office without running into somebody that's talking about a new way to create access to home ownership. So don't get stuck in the, oh, well, it's expensive to buy. It's expensive to rent. So there are a lot of people that you could get in touch with. Tiffany Dawn Cross has been helping us with dedicated credit repair. I can tell you it was very expensive to go from making $600,000 a year to making nothing. That was expensive. That was expensive. That's been expensive. Anyway, so let's continue to move on. I'm always an open book, and I'm always going to tell you exactly what's going on. And I can tell you that you have to create a situation for yourself where you're loving what you're doing during the day, but also what you're doing during the day is able to empower a lifestyle to where you, because of ownership, you're able to do other things, right? Not getting lost in the real estate ownership. I wear my name tag everywhere. Because I wear my name tag everywhere, then I'm branded. Well, hold up. Where are you wearing your name tag to? And if it's just the grocery store, you're missing out, right? So get out there, get involved. Your network will determine your net worth. So how can you benefit from also being a good person? How can you benefit from starting with the give, right? Okay, all right. Let's transition into the notes part of the class. I'm going to go ahead and move the computer over here, and we're going to get started. All right. Good morning, Zach Bach. Good to see you. I threw out my freaking back yesterday. I'm walking around just trying to stand like a normal person, like whose back is not bothering them. And I'm having trouble remembering what that feels like. Okay. So I'm all hunched over today. By the end of the day yesterday, I looked like Quasimodo. I was completely hunched over, and everyone's like, "Are you okay?" I'm like, "I just need to go to bed," and I did. I was asleep by 7:30. Right, Zach? It's amazing what happens when you work hard during the day and then you turn off your iPad or your iPhone. I like it. I agree with you, Zach. Okay. So like I said, we're going to talk about leasing. I'm sorry. Hey, Deanna?
Yeah.
Is there any bottles of water?
Yeah, I put that some.
Beautiful. Thank you. Leasing versus owning. You know what? I don't like the way that turned out. That line isn't quite straight. We're going to rewrite that. I'm not happy with that one. Okay. Okay. Watch it be 10 times worse. Leasing versus, I think it's just as bad. Oh, shut up, Zach.
You know, the lights are causing a glare on the words.
Shut up, Zach. Leasing versus owning. Now that you've said something, the lights could move. It is, there you go. That's improved. Leasing versus owning. Changed the color here. Working with renters. It took me too long to realize that you were pulling my leg. I was like, does the E look weird? Should I rewrite it?
It's your video that you have to make.
It's like I'm the most sarcastic person in the world, but I also don't understand sarcasm. It makes life difficult. Becoming cost of renting. Okay, beautiful. Oh, Deanna, you brought that water like a ninja. Deanna, you move around the office like a ninja.
Yeah, I am.
Yeah, very quiet. All right. Deanna could just like, yeah,
Just need the skills.
just boom. And then I'd have no idea what hit me. Okay, so leasing versus owning. So there's a lot of different ways, and we kind of touched on some of this during the introduction for this class. This applies to a lot. So of course, leasing, so renting versus buying your house, right? So if you're renting a house versus buying a house. Now, the other, what did we talk about earlier? What's another way that people are leasing that they should not be leasing? Being an employee versus owning. There's a lot of ways that we're throwing away our money right now, making a lot of money for a lot of other people. And then, so you've got renting versus buying. And then, of course, the last one, and this is, so for those of you that haven't watched it, there's a lot of really great interviews, a lot of really great documentaries by Nipsey Hussle, or about Nipsey Hussle, about what he built on Slauson and Crenshaw. And who turned me on to this was my friend Jeff Phillips up there in the Bay Area. I went up there and I talked to him. He said, what you're doing is very similar to what Nip did with Slauson and Crenshaw. And he talked to me about owning. He said, now, what they realized was that they needed to own their business. They needed to own the land that it was on because there's more freedom in it. And what I ended up doing was I ended up going down the rabbit trail that is Nipsey Hussle, and I really got an education in entrepreneurship, not only by listening to his music, but listening to his interviews. There's a great interview with Nipsey Hussle and Gary Vee that I suggest that you check out. There's another great documentary called, I believe, Slauson and Crenshaw, about what they did, how they did it, opening up a high-end sort of retail store that also has opportunity to, for education and employment through a storefront, right? So renting versus buying your house, being an employee versus owning your business, and then of course the last one, which we were just talking about, which is let's see, what do you call this? Commercial, being a commercial tenant, which of course we are, versus what do we call this? Owning. It's the same exact thing, right? So renting versus buying, being an employee versus owning a part of your business. And I've been studying a lot of really different interesting ways in which businesses are structured that benefit everybody. Certain requirements for being a part of these co-ops. And Amy, I watched a couple of TED Talks that I think that you would really enjoy on workers' cooperatives. Now, being a part of a worker cooperative, it isn't a denial of capitalism. It's understanding capitalism. It's understanding how to create a product by working together cooperatively, and then helping to establish a floor that people are able to work into, right? A type of lifestyle by which modest or moderate success is a byproduct of being a part of this community, but then also the lifestyle success, right? A lot of people talk about success as a monetary thing versus talking about success as, well, what do you want? Like a lot of people are like, oh, well, I want $1 million. Well, and I was one of those people at one point. I was like, how do you make $1 million in a year? Okay, how do you make $1 million in a year? Well, why do you want to make $1 million in a year? Let's talk about that. Okay, and then what are you going to do when you have $1 million? And then why aren't you doing those things already, right? Because if we really bring it down to the brass tacks, we'll find out that what people want by attaining ownership is they want freedom. Now, freedom is financial freedom, which is what Darren Campbell says. Darren Campbell and I worked together for a number of years. I love this man. He's teaching NFL players about home ownership now. Like, what an awesome job he has. What a cool opportunity. He's the $4.5 billion man now, $4.6 billion in real estate. He talks about freedom is financial freedom. Well, how do you create financial freedom by living month to month? That's very difficult. You better have some wealthy parents, right? And a lot of people, they have access to those wealthy parents that are able to bail them out and able to help them out whenever they tend to fall, and they're okay. But for those people who needed to come up, those people who need to learn and develop and adapt and overcome, we're all going to be tested here. So you cannot rest on the laurels of, your parents forever. You cannot rest in anyone's shadow. For those of you that haven't been tested yet, plan on being tested. Like I said, we're entering Aries season. We're entering a war season. Who is your squad? Who's your tribe? You ready to go? Okay. So that's sort of, how much more deep do we need to get into that? So what we could talk about here for a moment is, at one point, let me give you a real example here, guys. I was talking to a friend of mine who is a class in, actually, one of the high school students, high school teacher. And he was considering selling the house that he loved because he was interested in, being the top of the market. And we broke down the finances on how much he would make, and then what the plan was, to rent for a couple of years and then see what happens with the market. That's something that I hear from a lot of different people. They want to cash out at the top of the market, banking on the fact that it's going to crash, and then they want to be able to rent for a couple of years, and then they'll be okay. Now, here's the truth. The average rental is going to be at least $2,400-$2,500 a month in this market. Now, with the scarcity probably making it so that renters always feel the pain first. They're always the ones that are affected by the extremes in the market first, because they have to suffer the financial repercussions of the people that also own the property, right? So if you're a renter, you're in a very vulnerable situation. But let's talk about $2,500 a month for a moment. So, excuse me, $2,500 a month is, what is that, $27,000 annually? 2,500 times 12? I think it's 27,000. 30,000. Even worse. So basically what you're doing is you're putting yourself in a situation to where if you're renting annually, you said 30,000, huh? I was off. What did I say?
I pay 42,000.
You pay 42,000 in rent.
3,500.
Okay. So $30,000 annually. And now with buying, it's the same thing, right? But in a lot of ways, you're not accounting for the fact that, what's going to continue to happen? What's going to continue to happen? We're entering a place where what has to happen is we're either going to build a lot of housing. There's going to be a return to Main Street where there's a middle class, a rebirth where people can then pay off their own houses again. Or we're going to see, of course, a crash. And I don't want to see a crash, but right now we're banking on the dollar at the point of a gun. And that puts everybody in a very dangerous situation. But that being said, God, who do you want to be able to come evict you, right? Who do you want to be able to come kick you out of your house? And we've talked about this before with the birth of Civil, CIVVL, and the monetization of evictions, the Uberization of evictions. What's going to happen the next time around with evictions? It's not going to be necessarily the sheriff with a court order. It's going to be some guy making $125 telling you to get the heck out of your house, right? That is an independent contractor. What a scary post-apocalyptic world the extremes of capitalism has created for us. There has to be another answer, right? And what happens is, with all of this stuff, this is really government enforced scarcity. Because if people had the opportunity to build their own homes, and if people didn't have to cooperate with the sort of extremes of government control, then we wouldn't be in the situation that we're in anyway. But so what you're doing is then we're talking about a very complicated web. and a very intricate system. And then you're talking about potentially banking on the downfall of something by which people have been creating life savings. People are now in situations where they're buying 4 and 5 houses and then they're done with their life. Basically, they can kind of phone it in, and then you have to question and you have to be like, well, is that really the kind of world that we really want to live in? So there's a lot of really important questions to ask ourselves because the number one landowner right now in America is Bill Gates. The number one landowner, the number one owner of farmland in America is Bill Gates. And so what happens when we go to these sort of extremes in which the people that are engaged in farming also are the largest owners of private real estate, are engaged in multinational corporations. And then what happens is you have these sort of extremes like what is going on in India, where you have 10,000 farmers killing themselves every year. That's the sad numbers. Over 10,000 farmers, 28 a day, are killing themselves every year. And of course, if you look at what has happened right now, and this isn't conspiracy, all of this stuff is true. There is this massive investment in India in their farm product, in their farmlands, that unfortunately has driven a lot of independent farmers out of business. And we're seeing a lot of this starting to happen in America now. And isn't that going to be a scary world where we have completely controlled our farmers through agriculture, through development, to where your average food is traveling 2,500 miles before reaching your plate. Your average plate of food is traveling 2,500 miles before reaching your plate. That isn't sustainable. And so we need to create a situation, of course, where we're going back to these locally owned, locally operated, heavily invested in the community type of situations. But until we get there, we're all sort of like banking on this sort of weird situation where it's like, well, what happens if this? And what happens if that, right? Well, in the interim, like I said, housing prices have consistently done this. Now, at any different point, they're like, let's say this is 2008, and it goes like this. And then let's say, and I don't think that this is going to be the situation, but like 2021, it goes like this again. And eventually it levels out over time, But like I said, I don't think that's going to happen. And the reason why is because people have equity in their homes. You don't have this sort of situation that we had in last time in 2008 where, there was a lot of different things that all had to happen all at once. And with the credit card debt being predatory with the high interest rates, like basically tripling the average family's credit card debt, to the adjustable rate mortgages that went up when the interest rates went up. There's a lot of different things that happened. But what happened was people were squeezed thin. Nobody had equity in their homes. Right now we're in a situation where the average person who was bought in the last year has seen a $100,000 increase in equity in their home in my neighborhood. And I live in suburbia. They went from $400,000 to $500,000 in average price in a year. And so there's a lot of people that have equity. Even though people have lost their jobs, they're in a situation where because they have equity in their homes, they can tend to afford to sell their homes or wait for a little while, renegotiate their debts, whatever it is that they're needing to do in order to put themselves in a situation to where they're able to start on their next leg. For a lot of people, that's leaving the state of California, and they're sort of cashing out and then putting their money to work for them somewhere else, which is then inflating a lot of other local economies that are seeing the same issue. So what we're seeing right now is the sort of third great migration or fourth great migration. A lot of the ones in the past were motivated by wars ending, by racial, a lot of racial segregation in the South, causing people to go to the major cities in order to find opportunity in manufacturing, et cetera, and so forth. But what we've seen this time is a devaluation of the average manufacturing job. Manufacturing used to be the birth of the middle class, and it used to create home ownership for people. And in fact, there was a lot of really intelligent things that were happening at the time, in that the average home was affordable. People could afford to, they didn't have to take out these large loans from these huge banks. They can take out a small loan from their local bank, and then eventually they'll pay off their house, and then they end up owning their home. Now that's financial security. That's well-being, right? Not having $240,000 in equity in a $700,000 home, right? So we need to get back to a situation where home ownership is becoming affordable, There was a lot of really brilliant things that happened in the beginning of the birth of suburbia. There's also a lot of really terrible things that happened, and we've talked about this before, about like in The Color of Law, written by Richard Rothstein, through redlining. We had entire classes about this. But the point is through all of this innovation and through all of this building, we sort of reimagined infrastructure as Americans. And it created a situation where people could commute to work. There were now places where people were congregating to work. And what we had was a very interesting birth of the middle class. We had a Main Street because people could afford to do the things that they loved, right? And then eventually manufacturing also helped create a situation where not only were people, and this is a lot of this is due to the labor unions. A lot of this is due to people striking and being willing to fight the fight, often violently. And then they fought for workers' rights. And then what happened is the average person eventually was in a situation where manufacturing also was a path out of poverty. People could work in blue-collar jobs without the stigma being attached to it of it being a negative thing, which is a very sort of American thing, unfortunately. And so what happens is, due to this birth of the middle class, consumption was very important to the person that was thinking, I need my average worker to be able to afford the thing that they're helping to build. So you had very intelligent innovators like Ford, where he said, how do I get the average cost of an automobile so that it's not something that only the super wealthy could afford, but something that everybody can afford. Now, of course, what he did was he realized that by making his car, now of course we talk about homes, more affordable, more people would be able to have access to buying, right? And that is the innovative part of capitalism that we are missing today, where we have exchanged the sweatshop down the street for the sweatshop south of the border, or the sweatshop overseas for the ones down the street, right? Now, we live in a situation where right now, due to too many people being employees and not enough people owning, we've exchanged this sort of like low dollar convenience. How quickly can I get something? Can I have a couch delivered on Tuesday? How cheap can I get my groceries? And then not caring about where these things come from, in addition to, of course, FDA, government getting involved, being against food labeling, so you don't necessarily know where your food is coming from. What happens is we're putting our neighbors out of business. And a lot of times we don't even realize that we're putting our neighbors out of business by engaging in this sort of multinational sort of corporation thing, because it creates more employees versus ownership. And then what happens is, and this is really important to know too, this is why people like Ford were so innovative. And a lot of these capitalists that find a way to create a product that people can afford, that there's a demand for, and we're seeing this happen now with ADUs, accessory dwelling units. We're seeing it happen with this other affordable housing like home printing. There's a printer now called the Vulcan 7, which I believe was created out of Austin, Texas, a suburb north of Austin, Texas. And they're printing homes. It takes about 24 hours to print a home, and the average cost of a home is about $1,700 to $1,800. Isn't that innovative? Tiny house villages are sort of, seeing this emergence, not just for the poor, but for people that want the sort of alternative style living, where they would rather be in a smaller home, have access to some communal spaces. So shared living, shared workspaces, like what we've got going on, are sort of, people are getting in it together, right? So what happens is when you have too many people on this end of the spectrum and not enough people on this end, a healthy economy, a healthy economy is sort of this, right? You've got this sort of lower class down here, which is the proletariat, they're the working class, and they're the ones that are doing a lot of the work. But because of that, they also own, some of the wealth, right? It's sort of proportionate, right? And then you get to the tippity top, where there is, the elites, they're being served by everybody, but they're up here and they have sort of proportionate wealth to where they're at. And then there's this like sort of healthy middle class. Well, what happens is when you get to a point, and this isn't totally healthy right here, But what we've got to right now is we've got this owning the proletariat has swelled. So they're all down here, and then there's like this tippity top up here, and they own everything, and everybody down here is doing all the work, but they have none of the ownership. And this is all the wealth. And so this proletariat has swelled, and when the proletariat swells, the pyramid flips, and then you have a bunch of people who are like, why am I working for the benefit of other people when I have no opportunity for ownership myself? And then it's guillotines, right? And then it's the French Revolution, it's the American Revolution. It's people feeling very uncomfortable about being represented by an owning class as an employee constantly, but then also having the inability to exit the employee class to become an owner. And what's really interesting about becoming an owner is a lot of times it is born out of tragedy, which is what we're seeing with COVID-19. We're seeing a lot of people who are like, oh my gosh, I got laid off due to COVID-19. I was working for somebody else. I was doing this and that. And now you're seeing a lot of people who are like, I cannot depend on other people to feed me. I will never do it again, which is what happened after the plague. It was Renaissance. It was the birth of the Enlightenment. A lot of people were like, oh my gosh, I need to learn a trade so that in the event that something happens, I can practice my trade and then go to the merchant, go to the gathering over the weekend, the fair, whatever, and then sell it with other people, transact with other business owners. And that's what we're seeing right now, which, of course, that is the benefit of sort of breaking of the system that's happening currently. Now, of course, the last step of this is commercial ownership versus owning the property. Now, when you are a tenant, just like here, when you are a tenant, when you are an employee, when you are a tenant in a commercial space, a lot of other people have a lot of say over what you can and cannot do in your own space, right? You don't own the lot that you're on, and so you have to always be in a situation where you're running things by other people. Now, of course, all of this, like we have said before, is about freedom, right? So freedom, really at the end of the day, is created by financial freedom. It's created by ownership. And if you don't have ownership, you are owned, period. If you do not have ownership or you do not have an ability to create ownership within the systems and structures that you are a part of, then you are owned. And isn't that the ugly underbelly of all of this? Okay, so good night. My phone sounds like a slot machine. Okay, so the next step, of course, is owning your commercial building versus renting it, being a tenant, because that creates more opportunity for you, which then creates more opportunity for you to create opportunity for other people, right? The benefit of becoming a great leader is to create other leaders. You want to be firing yourself constantly. And if you are in a situation to where your time is freed up, are you going to be another Bahamas baby, freaking going around, cruising around, bragging about all the fancy traveling that you're doing, getting fat, having meat sweats, clogging toilets, playing golf, or are you going to spend your excess time like doing good things for other people? And so that's what I want to do. I want to create more people who are interested in creating ownership for other people, who are more interested in creating opportunities for other people than are interested in creating sort of opportunities for the elite. Let's create systems in which success is a byproduct of being part of a healthy tribe, right? Period. Okay, working with renters. Damn it, I have 4 minutes. 2 more topics. Okay, we kind of went over the cost of renting. A big part of the cost of renting is, of course, the application fees. So like, let's say that you have an application fee of $35. And let's say that, and here we go, right? The ugly parts of all of this crap. Now, $35 times 10 is $350. Times 20, $700. So if you are a landlord, if you are a property manager, because a lot of landlords don't do this crap. Let's get real. It's a lot of property management companies that are pulling this sort of shady bull crap. So what happens is they take that $35 per property and they'll do 20 applicants for it, 30 applicants for it, because
they know that they're making $350 for 10. They're making $700 for 20. They're making $1,050 for 30, right? So they're in a situation to where they're making freaking money, right? And what a system to be a part of. Isn't that freaking ugly, right? So 1,050, $700, $350. And I've heard people talk about how they're in property management. They're like, hey, I'll take 30, 40 applicants because it pays. It pays the bills. Because they're not thinking about the inverse of this, which is the person who has had to put in 20 or 30 different freaking fees themselves and they continue to miss out. Isn't that some bullshit? Isn't that sort of typical of this industry, which has created so many hostile opportunities for so many people, despite being filled with a lot of pretty good people, a lot of good people that are trying to do good by people, but there are systems that we need to call out. There are ways in which business is being practiced that we need to call out that we can do better by, right? So let's say you, as an individual, had to put that in 10 times because you kept missing out. Then you had to take $350 out of your pocket to rent. Or you had to take $700 out of your pocket because you put in 20 different applications to rent. Now, what does it mean for an individual to have to put in $700 just in freaking application fees? That's a lot of money for the average person to try to accumulate. Plus, we're looking at first and last months, right? So first and last month. So if the average month is $2,500, and you're not living out in Orange County, you're not living in Tustin, right? If the average month rent is $2,500, you're looking at first and last is $5,000. God, let's hope you're okay. Let's hope you're doing all right. So, what happens, and this, you know what, and that's where we'll finish. So the last thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to talk to you guys about working with renters, and we're going to really scale this really quick. We're going to talk about it very briefly. I do not encourage you to work with renters because you're going to be put in a situation where for $100, for $200, you're going to be paid, when in fact, a lot of people don't want to work with a real estate agent when working with renters. A lot of property management companies either want to work directly. A lot of homeowners want to work directly. I always tell people, go to those secondary sites, go to the Zillows, go to the freaking Craigslist. If it's too good to be true, it's definitely too good to be true. If somebody is doing missionary work in Africa and they're only requiring a $2,000 deposit, they're definitely not doing missionary work in Africa. And your $2,000 is going to get snatched up. So be careful. It is a predatory market. It is a difficult place to wade into. Even if you're operating out of the goodness of your heart, it's a difficult place to operate, to help people. So anyway, work with renters. Really, I kind of encourage people to go out and do it on their own because what the hell? What can I do? What can I do? Can't really do anything. Anyway. Finally, this is the last part, right? So working with renters, like I said, there's not really a huge incentive. And in fact, you can actually kind of hurt their chances by being that sort of middleman. Because a lot of these, I'm not going to tell you this, but they want to get people in there who might have an opportunity at buying the house originally. And they don't necessarily want to have an agent that's going to be a part of it. I'm telling you, it's just a little bit of a rough place to be a part of. Property management doesn't necessarily attract the cream of the crop. That's just the truth. There are some good people out there, but they are the anomaly and the baseline. So what happens when people can't afford to rent, they can't afford to buy, they can't afford to leave, and they can't afford to stay? We're about to see, I think. And, the number one employer in the state of California has been put in a situation where 60% of them have closed their doors permanently. And that's put a lot of people out of work. So what happens when this moratorium on evictions lifts? What happens when all of these things, what happens when all of these things happen? What happens when the other foot drops, right? Because we're all in a situation where we know that the other foot's going to drop. I don't know. I don't have a crystal ball. But I do know this about crystal balls, and this is where we're going to end it. You ready for this, Amy?
I'm listening.
So I went to the merchant market the other day. We're going to make this about me. I went to the merchant market the other day, and I bought a crystal ball. And I was really excited about the magical capabilities of this crystal ball, and that I would look into it, that I would see my future, right? So I put the crystal ball, maybe I'd communicate with the dead or whatever. I'd learned some infinite wisdom out there. So I put this crystal ball in the living room, and the person calls me later that day. They said, "Hey, whatever you do, I forgot to tell you, do not leave your crystal ball uncovered." Right? And I said, "Leave my crystal ball uncovered? Why? Will ghosts or demons get in there? Will I see something that I won't? Will I see something that I won't be able to unsee?" And she says, "No. If the light hits it at the wrong angle, it'll burn your house down." All of that to say, there is no crystal ball. You have to just sort of surrender. You have to be a part of it. Decide what you want to do. There is no perfect time to own. There is no perfect time to. The perfect time to own was 20 years ago, right? The next best time is today. Okay, everybody. I appreciate you guys tuning in. I hope that you enjoyed class. I'm going to stick around for a minute on Zoom. Everybody have an absolutely wonderful day, and I hope to see you at the hiring event here at 11 o'clock. Adios.